We want to make sure we get to audience questions that you may have as well. This is kind of along the lines of what Mr. Junkas was just saying. The legislature. So the legislature adjourned in May with a lot of unfinished business. You tried to get a bill passed that would have allowed some borrowing to beef up the pension system. That didn't get called in the Senate. People don't understand why, when you're down there, you're not doing a line-by-line review of the budget and actually proposing cuts. So why did you adjourn in May with so much unfinished business?
We adjourned with a balanced budget. People don't like to say that because it's passed around by like a lot of the education groups and other people who wanted more money than we were willing to allocate. And so they said, well, it's not a balanced budget because you're giving us less than we did the year before. Unfortunately, that's not the way business works. We looked at our revenue, we anticipated what was going to be there, and we passed appropriation bills that equaled that revenue sources exactly dollar for dollar. We said we'd like to come back and if the things, finally we started looking at this and saying, we're going to look at our revenue numbers as the years go by, and if we can put a separate appropriation in the spring, we will do that in order to further fund some of these very necessary needs that the state has. So we did pass a balanced budget. Some people weren't happy with it because they didn't get everything they wanted, but that was because our revenues were down over 8% in both of the largest funding sources we have, which are sales tax and individual income tax.
Representative McCarthy's own caucus leader, Speaker Mike Madigan, said the budget was unbalanced. It's on videotape on Capitol Facts Live. You can look it up. I can send you the link. So therefore, they voted for an unbalanced and therefore unconstitutional budget. Our state had to borrow $4 billion more this year to quote unquote balance the budget. That's another $3,500 per household for each of you. So again, line by line review of the budget is not very difficult. For the last 2 years, if I'm correct, they passed a lump sum budget, gave it to the governor, and said, you figure out what to do. For years before that, there were endless extra sessions and special sessions, and still we could not balance budgets. We added to our debt, we added to our backlog of bills. So if that's what you'd like to see again next year, the year after that, and the year after that, then you should feel free to continue to vote for it.
Everyone knows what's happened to our economy. I think we were very responsible. We made our revenue projections back in FY08, which is in the middle of 2007 it started. For about 10 years before that, we never had less than an 8% growth in our most predominant revenue sources. So we predicted like a 9.5% growth that year. I think it was very responsible at the time. When the economy tanked, a lot of people had to make different plans and change the plans that they had. So we went from expecting a 9% increase to we received a 9% decrease in our revenue sources, which was actually like a 20% loss then, and we've been fighting back with that ever since. As I told you earlier, the revenue numbers at our two most important revenue sources have finally started to eke up, but we still have to go there knowing that we have to hold spending level at the best. And there are many of us that have called for a line by line. We have appropriations committees to do that every day, and they should have more power. I agree with that. I've spoken out for that. On the $4 billion that we wanted to borrow, we had a chance to borrow that between 1 3/4 and 2% on state bonds. Or by not paying it to the pension plans, we would have had to pay 8.5% on that. So it's a pretty easy thing to say. Should we? Now, the thing was, we said, no, we could have just cut another $4 billion. We could have cut schools about $2 billion more than we were already cutting. We could have cut higher ed another $500 million. We could have cut human services, treatment for the disabled. We thought we had cut them back so far that we're getting close to putting people, handicapped people out on the streets. So we didn't want to do this. I don't like the fact that we have to borrow, but once again, this is a one-time thing in our economic history, hopefully. No one has ever seen anything like it before. We're on the way out. Hopefully, your business will help us, get out of this. But we had to make some drastic changes, but it was a matter of either making those cuts. And now here's the thing. When we couldn't do the borrowing because we didn't have enough votes at first, then we said, okay, we're going to make the cuts. Now, of course, all the groups who get state money came out very strongly against the bill that the Speaker brought forward, offering $4.2 billion in cuts. When the vote went up on the floor, up on the board, 14 of us voted for those cuts. 14 of us said, hey, you can't have it both ways. cuts. There were people who wouldn't vote for the borrowing, they wouldn't vote for any revenue increase, but they won't vote for the cuts either. It's like they're living in a fairy tale. So we do have some tough decisions to go forward, and we'll make those.
You know, I think it's important to note that with the borrowing and the debt and the budget, he said a 9% revenue growth projection. I want to know how many businesses here are projected 9% growth in their revenue. Exactly.
In the year
I want to let you know as well that in the middle of the recession, he talks about it, has devastated our state. 2007, I believe it began. In 2008, he voted for it. He was one of only 8 people that had the leadership to vote for a 12% pay hike and said, quote, I don't think my constituents think I'm overpaid. Quote, I would gladly accept that money. Is that fiscally responsible? I've called for a 10% pay cut for all state elected officials. And I think we should keep cutting and so to show leadership, to show a red on the budget. And we wouldn't have to borrow $4 billion, so we would stop the spending. Our revenues increased $6 billion in 7 years prior to last fiscal year. But what did they do? We took last year's budget, we added a 9% rosy projection, and spent more. So if you want to cut the spending, if you want to see our state get fiscally in line, and not see the same leadership kowtow that same folks down in Springfield, then that's why people project.
You know, sometimes my own personal code of conduct gets me into trouble. When I first got down to Springfield, I was told by many of the people that were in leadership at the time, as far as this pay raise he's talking about, the pay raise, the way it was done until just recently, and I was the main sponsor for changing this, so that now a pay raise has to be a straight up or down vote. For years, it had to be done by resolution, and the resolution had to be exactly the same one passed in both the House and the Senate. So the game that was played was that the House would pass one resolution, the Senate would pass their resolution, and neither time would the other, like the Senate one wouldn't be heard in the House, or the House one wouldn't be heard in the Senate. Senator Pete Phillip was famous for saying, the House can send me anything they want, I'm not going to call it, that the cost of living increase should be added to their salaries. Now, when I went down there, the state was in much better shape. When I first saw this, that this was another game they were playing, kind of like with the tuition waiver thing, where, once again, 100 people would vote to turn down the pay raise, but then on July 1st, when the pay raise would kick in, maybe 1 or 2 would not actually take the pay raise. So, when I first learned about this, I said, I'm not going to do this. If I'm going to take the pay raise, then I'm going to vote for the pay raise. Now, leaders on my side of the party said, you can't do that. You can't do that. And I said, well, I took a pay cut to get in here. You know, I was doing much better for a private business before I went to the General Assembly, and I'm not asking anybody to feel sorry for me. But when I saw cost of living increase going, I thought, I'm going to accept that when it comes to, if we're fortunate enough to get it in July 1st. So I had a choice to make. Do I want to be one of the ones who votes for this, I'm against that pay raise thing, but then takes it in July? Or do I want to be one of the ones that says up front, all right, I think it's at a time we can afford this right now. It's a cost of living increase. There's a separate commission that comes together. And these are people on both sides of the aisle, too, who do this. So now we have stopped that. We have put legislation forward that says from now on, any pay raise has to be a direct vote. None of these games, matching it up with a resolution from the Senate. And so it will be much more open-faced. But at the time, I think I did the thing that was morally correct to say, if you're going to accept the pay raise, then you should be willing to put your vote on it. I mean, sometimes I really stood out. There was one vote that I think Representative Junkas has on either one of his websites or someone brought it to my attention where I said, well, it's easy to find me. It's easy to find me out there. There's, you know, the only people voting for it, I was the only Caucasian on the list. So I did stand out. But I can promise you, on both sides of the aisle, there were over 90 people who voted against it, but then took it. So I thought the people of my area would rather have me be up front than be a phony about these things and then accept it in the darkness of night.
He voted for the pay raise and said, quote, I don't think my constituents think I'm overpaid. I will gladly accept that money in the middle of a recession. He could have simply voted against the resolution and not asked for the pay increase of 12%.
When our economy went down, I was one of the leaders and the sponsor of taking the furlough days. We were going to ask our state employees to do it, so I voted overwhelmingly to say, let's take the 12 furlough days last year. We voted to do it again this year. It's approximately 5% pay cut every year. We're in tough times now. We need some tough decisions. And I joined with the many colleagues in voting for when the pay raise was not justified in any way. Back when the budgets were growing every year, and there was this cost of living thing, I just made the decision for myself that said that if you're going to take it, you ought to vote for it. And if you don't vote for it, you shouldn't take it. And I made that very clear on the House floor, even asking the sponsors of the bill who were Democrats. Are you not going to take it if it comes through? And many of them were very angry with me for doing that. It was like the boys club, you shouldn't embarrass something like
all these disingenuous bills. Well, if you want to have new leaders that aren't going to blame everyone else, they will let you hold us accountable. Okay.
I'm not blaming anybody in Congress. I'm telling you, this is the way I felt was the right way to do it. I thought that's the way the people in the 32nd district would respond. So I went forward on what I thought was a moral decision. But it's not my Congress. I mean, when I talk about those people voting against the pay raise, the other side of the House was much more generous in handing votes against the pay raise, but accepting it almost unanimously.